Good afternoon. This is Dr. David A. Paget. This is Urban Geography 4850, uh, Maymester 2021. Today is May 4th. This is the second day of class, and this is the third hour of the second day of class. In this hour, we are going to pick it up where we left off yesterday with the reading assignments associated with module 1. And so module 1 is just basically the first day of class and associated materials. So yesterday, I think I spent most of the time covering land use philosophy. And so you are working on an essay now where you will formulate your own land use philosophy. And I think some people had some questions about that, or how you should approach it. Basically, what you're doing is aligning your land use philosophy with one of the ones that we discussed. And your philosophy doesn't have to absolutely be preservationist. It doesn't have to be entirely conservationist. It doesn't have to be more closely related to indigenous. It can be a combination of these, or you can just devise your own. But in any case, your philosophy has to be grounded in the readings that go along with the assignment. And so those readings, of course, are included with the reading materials. So you have, of course, Aldo Leopold's Land Ethic, The Tragedy of the Commons, and Thomas Malthus's Essay on Population. And then there are many other Native American philosophical quotes and statements, and so you'll see there's some African. There's Dr. Wangari Maathai, some of her perspectives on the environment from an indigenous African standpoint, and then of course we have just a collection of readings that you can glean. There's some African proverbs on the environment. And so what you'll do is just take a look at these various philosophical perspectives on the environment, and just devise your own. Like, there's no real right or wrong answers here. The only wrong answer would be if you just wrote an editorial piece and didn't mention any of the readings. If you just write something that says, here's what I think about the environment, blah, 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 blah. No. You'd have to say, well, my environmental philosophy is most closely aligned with that of indigenous Native Americans because, as Chief Joseph said, blah, blah, blah. You can quote Wangari Maathai, so on and so forth. Or you might, say that some of your philosophy or ideology is somewhat aligned with Thomas Malthus. And we talked about that yesterday. So this, remember, Thomas Malthus posted a theory, and it's based upon his own philosophical groundings in human nature. Are humans naturally good, or are we evil, or are we somewhere in between? And the jury's still out on that. People are still arguing whether or not Malthus was right. One of the people who tried to project or extrapolate upon what Thomas Malthus was saying was Garrett Hardin, and I talked about that yesterday, where he said that, he agreed with Malthus. Basically, he did say that human nature is such that we cannot be trusted with the environment. Because if you think about it, and I'll toss this question out there. You can answer if you want. True or false? Do children have to be taught to share? True or false?
I think so, because they're just gonna end up growing to be selfish, and like they're gonna think that everything belongs to them.
Yeah,
They're
our
not.
nature, exactly. We're selfish by nature. If you've seen children when they're kids, and I've seen this, you give the kids some toys, are they going to be like, I'll give you a toy and then you can have a toy? No, they're all going to want all the toys. And that's just human nature. You have to teach children, no, give that ball to your sister, let your brother hold, we don't come out of the womb like being uh, benevolent and sharing. We're greedy, so that's what Hardin was saying, is that, look, we can't be trusted with the environment on our own volition as human beings. We'll eat up everything we can eat. We'll cut down every tree. We'll use up all the water. That's what we do. We're human beings, unless we engage in some higher order thinking that will result in our saving the planet. Or else we're not going to have any place to live. I know people are trying to go to Mars, but that's a ways off. So Hardin agreed with Malthus, but he provided us a solution. He said there's no technological solution. So clearly Hardin is not of the cornucopian uh, mindset. He says, no, there's no way there's no technology that we can create. There's no technology that we can create as humans that's going to stop us from being who we are, right? There's nothing that we can do about it except maybe think higher order thinking. Earlier we had a question about, or it was a question before the class started, about the land ethic and Aldo Leopold, specifically what's inside the Sand County Almanac. So Aldo Leopold and Rachel Carson, but I'll focus on Aldo Leopold right now. Leopold's essay really makes us take a hard look at how we humans relate to the rest of the planet, right? And it's this really a deep read. You have to read it more than once to really get it. And you might not even get it after all that. But essentially, again, as I said before class started, Leopold breaks it down and says, look, we're no different. We human beings are no different than the trees, the grass, and everything else out here, which is essentially what Native Americans are saying, or indigenous people are saying, in that we are of the earth, and that the earth is our mother, and that we're born of the earth. That's that indigenous philosophy. But it's kind of hard for a lot of us to comprehend in the modern Western world, right? So Aldo Leopold wrote this Sand County Almanac in 1949. The land ethic is a chapter inside of the Sand County Almanac. But Leopold tried to make logical sense of something that might seem more spiritual, right? Because as soon as if you're talking about saving the planet and we're going to do the right thing and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and you start, if you're in a professional meeting, or if you're in a community meeting and you start going off talking to the birds, and the birds said to me, don't shoot me, please. People look at you like you kind of wacky, right? What do you mean the birds talk to you, right? So Leopold, understanding the context that we're in terms of trying to preserve land, took it as saying that, okay, we're not saying that land is a spiritual being, but we're not saying that it's a commodity either. And as I explained before the class started, that if you have a tree in your yard, and you could go outside right now and chop that tree down, unless it's some endangered species, you're good. No problem. No problem. That tree has no rights. There's no tree bill of rights. I mean, there's no Bill of Rights for tree. I mean, even a dog, if you did something and killed a dog, you'd have a problem. So even the dog has more rights than trees. But then we're talking about domesticated animals, right? The dog in its present form would not exist except for human beings. It's the only reason that dog is around is because of us, right? That thing started out as a wolf. Now you wouldn't want a wolf in your house. You'll have Fido in your house, or Rover, or whatever your dog's name is, but that's because we human beings over a long period of time have made some changes to that wolf and made that wolf work for us. But the wolf, that our dogs even have rights. So if, as Leopold says, imagine if the environment had the same right to exist that we do. You couldn't just cut that tree down. You couldn't just go in and bulldoze soil and put a Walmart there. You just couldn't make those types of decisions. And in many cases, when land use policy decisions are made, they're not made based upon that kind of philosophy, right? Usually it's, well, one person wants to use the land one way and another person wants to use land a different way. They end up in court, not to defend the land for the right of the land to exist itself, but which one of us is going to own it and do what we want to do to it. It's not about the land, right? So what Leopold was saying is that, shouldn't we preserve land because it has a right to exist, because in terms of its molecular makeup, it's not any different than we are, right? If you break it down molecularly, right? And so there have been a couple of court cases that have been decided based upon Leopold's philosophy, and we'll talk about that perhaps later. But that's very rare, because I mean, some of you might end up in law school and you'll figure out that that the basis of law is philosophy. I mean, think about it. Why isn't it okay to kill people, right? Or is it? Right? Now, if somebody breaks to your house and you shoot them and kill them, then that's okay. But if you walk out in the middle of the street and shoot that same person, you're going to prison. So so some acts that we engage in as human beings can be right and wrong at the same time, right? So who meets that out? Well, that's what happens when we go to a court of law. Was it self-defense? Was it killing? Was it an accident? Was it manslaughter? Was it murder 3, 2, 1? Which one was it? Person is dead, right? Not going to bring the person back, but in meting out justice, and we can look at other cultures where certain kinds of killing are okay. There's some places where, look, if your family paid a dowry, your family owes a dowry to another family because your son married their daughter in an arranged marriage, and the family that owes a dowry, you put them on a payment plan. They didn't have it all at first. So they said, look, we'll pay you X amount per month dowry. Okay. And let's say the bride's family starts coming up short. Guess what? There are some cultures where it's okay for the family that's owed the money to drag this bride out in the street and set her on fire. Nobody goes to jail. And you do that here, you're going straight to jail. So so when we start speaking about the philosophical underpinnings of any law, there's a lot of thought that goes into it, because depending upon your philosophy or your philosophical underpinnings, the policies or the actions you take are going to go one way or the other. And so it's very difficult when we start speaking in terms of the legal basis of anything, or the legal basis of policy, who's right, who's wrong. It gets kind of very right brain. But I want to move on and to land use control. So we're going to get, how are these philosophical underpinnings actually implemented in an urban environment? So various types of land use control. Under land use control, we have what are called legislated actions. These are actions that are based in some form of policy. Some of these you've known about or learned about. Others we'll learn about later. But all of these are discussed in the readings. So I'll just talk about them here, and I'll bounce back into the readings later on. But you can just use this as a guide as far as what to read. Okay, so first is zoning. So I think when I left off yesterday, I said zoning is an example of mutually agreed upon or mutual coercion mutually agreed upon, right? So this comes out of Hardin. So many city governments now, and this has only been in the last 100 years or so, have agreed that in order for our cities to have some orderly layout, we're going to create zones of different kinds of land use. Now, the three main zones are residential, commercial, and industrial. Then, of course, there are other subsets of that. But the main goal of zoning is so that you don't have people in a residential neighborhood living next to an industrial facility. Who would want to do that? Do you want to live next to a factory? Now, there was a time before the automobile became dominant where, yes, tenements were built up right next to factories because people didn't have automobiles, and so you had to be within walking distance. There were towns called company towns where companies like Ford or Chevrolet, these or whatever, would literally build a factory and build housing around it. It's called a company town. The company owned the plant, and they owned your house, right? And they might have owned everything else in the community. It was called a company town. But as we moved out of the industrial period into more of a looking at a residential area as a place of peace and sanction, and as more and more individuals were able to own homes themselves, and that really didn't take place until after the Second World War, people wanted to protect their property. So if you invested basically your life savings in a home, the last thing you want is to have somebody be able to build some undesirable land use next door to you, which could be a Walmart. Now, we all like to go to Walmart, cheap stuff. You don't want to live next door to one. There's traffic. It's probably noisy. It's unless you really like Walmart, you don't want to live next door to one, or Target, or anything like that. So we create buffers between that kind of commercial land use and residential most of the time. And so, but it's a coercive form of management, of land use management. There's not, you can't, even if you own property. I think I used the example the other day. Even if you inherit some property and you think, oh, I'm going to build a Walmart, I'm going to sell this property to Walmart for $20 million, and I'm going to be rich. If that piece of land is not zoned commercial, you can't sell it to Walmart. Now, if Walmart really, really wants to build there, they'll get some lawyers, they'll go to court, they'll go to the Board of Zoning Appeals and try to get the zoning changed. Now, zoning in cities is not set in stone. You can go to a Board of Zoning Appeals, and if you make a strong case for why that zoning should be changed, then it might be granted. And I'm sure if you go on to Nashville's website, any city's website, and do a search for zoning appeals, they happen all day, every day. I'm sure you've driven around town and seen those red signs, zoning hearing, because they have to be public, right? You can't do this in secret, even though sometimes they do happen in secret. But people have to pay attention to that, because if you don't, and somebody changes the land use next to your neighborhood to something other than residential, who knows what you're going to end up living next to. And a lot of people find out too late, because they don't keep abreast of what's happening in terms of zoning appeals. But again, it's a coercive type of land use management. The alternative is to have no zoning. Now, Houston, I think, is the largest. Houston, Texas, is the largest city in the United States that does not have zoning. And if you ever go there, you will see that it's completely unorganized. Now, I don't know the history behind it. I don't know. Well, it's Texas. Texas is kind of a don't tread on me, state. That's always been their reputation. They kind of go against the grain on a lot of things. And so they don't have zoning in Houston, which presents a lot of problems for people who are trying to preserve the history of their communities. Because in a city that has no zoning, you essentially have kind of a Darwinist land value system, and it's based upon whatever land use is most valuable at the time monetarily. That's what survives. So one of the things that was happening in Houston for a while was some of the historically Black communities. There are many parts of Houston that were founded by freed Africans. And so those communities hold a lot of history, but there's no zoning. Without zoning, you can't declare your neighborhood as a historic preservation district. That's a zoning designation. There's no zoning. You can't say now if a neighborhood is deemed historical and they get that designation as part of the zoning policy, no developer can come in there and buy anything and put anything up. That's it. It's a historic district. I'm sure that you've been to cities where there's this historic district and the architecture is exactly like it was 100 years, 200 years ago, and it's protected, right? If you've been to Sacramento, California, there's old Sacramento, California. I think Beale Street in Memphis might have an historical designation, but not really in the traditional sense. If you've ever been to Beale Street, it has somewhat of an historical designation, but not really. But there are many parts of cities all over the country.
Is it like examples like with the battlefields, like in Georgia? There's a couple of battlefields.
Yeah, but that's more like you could say that, you can't go in and put a shopping mall on a Civil War battlefield. Yeah, they're like that. Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
And is that what we're trying to do with African Town in Mobile, Alabama?
No, well, yeah, exactly. Well, Africa Town already has some historical protection. A portion of it is protected under some form of historic preservation designation, but that does not mean that that anybody can go in there and do anything. But there are some places that are at risk, because not all of the community is under that historic designation. There are parts of the community that are, but there are parts that are not. And so that's where the fear is that there might be some development that will come in and eliminate that history, even though it's hard to see right now. So if you do the reading about zoning, and when we start getting into the discussion about policy and land use control, we'll get into it a lot more. There's exclusionary and inclusionary zoning that you'll read about. One form of exclusionary zoning is where a city might say, well, you can't build any kind of, you can't put any liquor stores in this area. And so there are a lot of places that are zoned so that there aren't any liquor stores. Or you might say, you can't, within this area of town, or a liquor store cannot be within 1,000 feet of a church. So that's actually a law in Nashville. You can't have a liquor store within 1,000 feet of a church or school. Of course, that can be appealed. But now, historically, exclusionary zoning was used to keep certain races of people out of white neighborhoods. So you would, in the zoning code, I mean, in some places it just openly said no Negroes, just, in the zoning code for a city, no Negroes in this part of town, like in the zoning code. Of course, a lot of that's been eliminated. What's inclusionary zoning? Inclusionary zoning is where you require landowners or developers to include a certain characteristic with anything they're trying to build. So if a developer in Nashville, Nashville actually tried to pass, Nashville actually did pass an inclusionary zoning bill that required, in certain parts of town that were gentrifying, it required developers to set aside, I think, about 20% of their property as being affordable, whatever affordable means, and that means different things in different parts of the country and different cities. And so you would think that, well, maybe you wouldn't think, well, and that was a coercive policy. There was no getting out of it. You built property in certain areas that were zoned residential in Nashville, you had to make 20% of your property affordable. Now, of course, developers, what do you think? Were developers okay with that? Yes or no?
Not because they wanted to make the most money that they could.
Yeah, of course they weren't. They were not okay with that at all. And that's exactly what the state said. So even though Nashville passed an inclusionary zoning bill, the state, you can read, it's in the readings, the state came in and state law supersedes local government law, right? So the state came in and said, no, you can't do that for the exact reason that you said. The state said that we cannot pass a law that will prevent a private landowner from making as much money as he or she wants off of his or her property. Right? It's all about money. Forget about the fact that people can't afford housing. We're not worried about that. We just want these landowners to make as much money as they can, because guess who's going to be paying these politicians and making contributions to these politicians' campaigns? People who can't afford housing, or these rich developers? Who do you think is going to make the biggest campaign contribution? So it's really, it's kind of depressing, actually, when you think about how we humans are, but it is what it is. I mean, that's what Malthus was saying. And like I said, what Malthus said goes against almost every religious edict you can think of. Is there a faith that's, well, I don't know, if we go back to the Old Testament, maybe, but really, you would think that people would say, yes, we want to have all kinds of people in our community. We don't have to have all people who can afford $700,000 condos. That would be boring. Why don't we just have 20% of the people who are just working, maybe a young person who drives a bus for the local school system? No, you're not going to have them in there. Okay, so zoning, I think I spent enough time on zoning. Now the eminent domain. Here's another coercive policy. I think I did put these under. Now, what is eminent domain? Eminent domain says that if the good of the community outweighs the good of the individual in terms of land use, the government can take that individual's private land, which seems to go against everything we believe in this country, but it's true. It's true. So, for example, and this happened to my relatives. I mean, it kind of worked out for them, but in Baltimore City, the city said a new school was needed. We, Baltimore City, need a new school, and we want to put it on where you live right now. And so that was that. Now, people can try to fight against eminent domain. Now, it's not that the city just takes your property and kicks you out in the street. As you can see in the notes, a fair price is offered to the landowner. But what do you think happens when the city or the federal government, any level of government comes along and says, we need to build a highway and we're going to pay you. We're going to give you a fair price for your home. You think it's going to be are they going to give you a fair price or are they going to lowball you? What do you think is going to happen? Think the city's going to, excuse me?
I said definitely a low ball.
Yeah, they're going to lowball you. And I mean, you think your home is worth $300,000, the city give you $100,000, maybe $120,000. I mean, this is what happens. You're not going to get $300,000. No, you're not even going to get close to that, right? And I know what you're thinking. Well, I'm going to go to court. Really? What kind of lawyer can you afford versus the city? Right? I mean, you have no chance. Now, unless you're a really wealthy person, you have no chance, right? You have no chance. Now, there are rare instances. There's a story in the readings about, it's very historical, about an African-American family in Nashville that literally got land in their family after emancipation. Land was stolen soon afterwards by some white individuals. The black family managed to get the land back. And a few years ago, the city of Nashville said, we want to build a school on your land and we'll offer you, I don't know how, they offered the family a lot of money. Now, here's where another issue, this is where we get into some philosophical arguments here. Now, I think if you can read the article, but I'm almost sure the city offered these people, it was a large piece of land, a couple hundred acres. I think they offered them about $2 million for the property. Now, a lot of people would say, show me the money. I'm out. 2 million. We can live someplace else. But think about that history. That family had family members buried on that land. The land was granted because they got the land after the land had been in the family since emancipation. Can you put a dollar sign value on that? They said, no, we're not selling. We don't care how much money you offer us, right? We're not selling. This land means more to us than any amount of money you can offer, which is almost an indigenous ideology, right? It's not even about the money. This land means more to us than any price that you can give us. And luckily, the community rallied around the family, black and white people rallied around the family, and somehow their property wasn't taken. That's a rare case. You can read about it in the readings. But eminent domain is very controversial. There's eminent domain that's happening now, primarily to increase cities' tax bases. So here's what happens. Let's say there's a neighborhood, nice houses, maybe the homes were built in the 1950s or 60s. People have maintained the homes. It's a clean neighborhood, right? But the homes were built in the 1960s. Now, let's say those homes might be worth $180,000, maybe $200,000, maybe. And there's single family homes on maybe quarter acre lots. It's nice spaced apart, like houses used to be built, backyards, right? Now, are those houses really, is the city just raking in a lot of property taxes off of those houses? No, they're inexpensive. The property tax is based upon the valuation of the property itself. So if you got $180,000 $180,000 60-year house sitting there, it could be nice. Maybe they've added on a garage, added on a game room. Nice house, but it's not really bringing in any cash to the city. So what some cities have done, and you can see this in the reading, is condemned those properties. Now, condemnation is what happens when you have blighted properties. Like maybe there's an old piece of property that's fallen down and in ruins, not used anymore, and the city will come in and deem that property condemned through condemnation, seize the property through eminent domain, and then build something that's a lot more aesthetically acceptable to the community, right? So that's a good thing. That's a good side of eminent domain in terms of designating property as being condemned, right? Because sometimes, maybe nobody wants to buy that property. Nobody's going to touch it except for the government. And maybe there might be a park there, maybe a skate park, or who knows what the city might put there in place of some condemned land. But some cities will actually say that an older neighborhood with older homes is blighted in legal terms in order to, I don't want to say an excuse, but maybe the right term might be excuse, to go in and seize those people's homes, those older homes, kick the people out, tear down all those old homes and put up some high-rise 800,000 condos. So not only do you get higher density development, you get more expensive development, and guess what? All those condo owners have to pay property taxes to the city, a whole lot more money than that old community was. So that's another type of eminent domain that is controversial, where condemnation is used and the blight designation is applied to older neighborhoods, older residential properties that might not necessarily be in disrepair, but just aren't bringing in tax dollars. Some other legislated actions in terms of land use control is the urban growth boundary. So there are some cities that will just say, "Well, past this," like in Oregon, cities can say, "Look, past this boundary in the city, you can't build anything," and that's it. I don't care how much money you have. If you want to, even if you're Microsoft or Amazon, you can't build anything out. It's going to be green space. Green space is healthy. We're not going to let you build anything out there. Then there are some what we call planned cities, and that like Columbia, Maryland. You can look that up. Now, because the for a variety of reasons, there are less coercive land use control strategies. One of them is the easement. So in an easement, the land stays with the owner. The city buys the rights, certain rights to the land. So let's say a family owns a large, nice, beautiful piece of property with trees and streams and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's only one house on this big piece of property. And let's say the city wants to create a new park, right? Now, the city could go in and seize the property through eminent domain, kick the landowner off the property, or give him or her a fair price for their housing and build the park. They could do that. But as soon as the city does that, the city can no longer collect property taxes off of publicly owned land, right? So this property owner who's probably paying a lot of property tax Now that you've taken his or her land away, that's gone. No more property tax from that land. So an easement is sort of a negotiation between the landowner, or a compromise via negotiations between the landowner and the city, where the city says, look, you can stay here. We can turn this into a park. You can come and you can do whatever you want in this park. Now, if a person lives in the park, let's say the park has a limit of 50 people for any gathering. You know, in the parks where they have those kiosks, sometimes the park will say, well, you can have no more than 50 people if you want to reserve this kiosk for your family barbecue, right? You're not gonna have 500 people out here barbecuing. But the city might say everybody has limits except for the person that lives in the park. Now, you want to have your family reunion here with 500 people, go right ahead. You know, it's you live here, you're fine. Also, you know, obviously the landowner has access to the park 24 hours a day, whereas a lot of parks close after dark. Most parks close at dusk. Some of them close at 6 o'clock. But so, in other words, the landowner who gets the easement has certain property rights above and beyond the public, and they'll probably also get a tax break. So they won't pay as high property taxes as they would have without it being a park, but they're not paying zero, which is what it would be if the whole piece of property became a park. Then there's use value taxation. So let's say a person dies and leaves a parcel of land to his or her children, right? So now the children own the land. Let's say the parents wanted to keep the land as is, in its natural state. You know, the kids, they want to get paid, they want to sell the land. Let's say the city doesn't want the land to be developed either. And so they go to the children who have inherited the property and say, look, here's what we're going to do. As long as you keep this land untouched, we'll lower your property taxes by 50%. So that's the deal that's made, you know. So we'll keep the land or the property in its natural state or in its historic state. We'll lower your property taxes. So that's another way. It's just less coercive, and the city still gets what it wants at the end of the day. A land trust. Now, land trust is sometimes a land trust basically is a fund where people raise money to buy land and in order to keep it in its natural state. So let's say, or not, maybe not natural state. So let's say there's a building that at one time was used as a safe house for Dr. Martin Luther King, historically, back in the day when he traveled. So now on the outside looking in, that house might not look any different from any other house, but it has that proven historical significance as being a place where Dr. King and his people stayed during the times when their lives might have been at risk, which was all the time. And let's say people knew this and they knew the owner of the home. And let's say the homeowner, of course, passed away. A historical society or the National Historic Preservation Trust or some organization like that would buy the home and turn it into like a museum or something like that, or turn it into just a historic site. And I'm sure that if you've traveled, if you've been, I'm trying to think, if you can go over by Fisk University, right? And I think there's a James Weldon Johnson house. So James Weldon Johnson wrote the Negro National Anthem, right? So, and he apparently had a house over by Fisk. So there was probably the Fisk raised money to buy that house, and now it's sort of a museum. You can go there and tour, and but it certainly didn't get torn down and turned into yet another condo over by Fisk University. Covenants. Covenant means promise. So let's say a landowner sees him or herself getting older. They might have a pretty valuable piece of property, and along comes developers making offers. We want to buy your property. And the landowner says, well, you can only buy my property if you promise to keep it like this, or if you promise to never do this, that, and the other. So there's some examples of where people have wooded properties that have trees, and they'll say anybody who buys this property has to promise that you won't cut down a single tree ever. And so covenants are another less coercive way of keeping land in a certain state. Now, the thing about covenants is that they can be challenged legally, so sometimes people might buy land, sign the covenant. As soon as a landowner dies, they're in court, well, she didn't really mean that we couldn't cut down any trees, and then it gets challenged. And if the defense isn't strong enough, then the covenant can be broken, and then the new landowner goes in and does whatever to that property. Finally, there's something called a TDR, transfer of development rights. So different pieces of property might have limits on how much they can be developed. So let's say an individual owns a parcel of land or a piece of property, and the zoning says that he or she can only put one house per half acre on that property. No more than one house per half acre. Why would a landowner have a problem with only being able to put one house per half acre on his or her land? Why would that be problematic?
The more housing you can have, the more money you can make.
Exactly. It's limiting the amount of money. I'm sure that you've driven around town and seen these duplexes and whatever. I mean property, or those tall and skinnies. So a developer can buy a lot that had one house on it, and now they'll build two tall and skinny, maybe three. They might put three tall and skinny. So they have these real skinny houses that go way back on the property. Like maybe there was a backyard there, but now the backyard is a house. So instead of having one maybe $400,000 house on this parcel of land, you can put three $350,000 tall and skinnies. And so, but if you allow developers to build like that, you're gonna have crowding. There's gonna be, people don't like it, but that's what developers will do to try to get away with it. But let's say the city absolutely does not want to change the zoning designation away from one house per half acre for whatever reason. They just don't want to do it. So what they might, let's say the landowners threaten to sue, take the city to court. So as an alternative, the city might say, okay, don't you own some land on the other side of town too? Yeah, well, that land is designated, but it's in a less sensitive area. Maybe it's not it's in a less sensitive area. So the city might say, okay, if you keep this piece of property here at one house per half acre, we'll transfer your right to develop your other piece of land to one house per quarter acre. Right now it's the same as this one, but we'll upgrade your right. And so that happens a lot of times. It's a compromise to keep certain pieces of property at a certain level of development, as opposed to being coercive and zone. So, and in many cases, if compensations if the city goes into negotiations, a lot of landowners will agree to that, rather than going to court, which can last for years, and then nobody wins sometimes when you end up in court for a long time. So as you get into your
Model 2? Not Model 1.
into the assignments, land use policy essay, then of course you can, there are lots of readings you can understand. Essentially in this essay, you're trying to connect these various means of land use control to some form of philosophical underpinnings. Now, this essay is going to challenge you, okay? So and we'll have a discussion, I believe, on Thursday when we come to class. So just be prepared for that. If you have any questions about it, again, lots of you all really were texting me at 2 o'clock in the morning, which is fine. I was asleep. But that's fine. If you want to text me at 2 o'clock in the morning, first, as soon as I get up, I'll respond.
Dr. Paget,
Yes.
I have a question. Is there any way that you could, change the due dates for, not the due dates, but the due times to be at 11:59 rather at 12 in the day? Because I know I only have time to do work like at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, and then for it to be due like at, 12 noon is kind of hard for me to find time. I just wanted to ask if you could cater.
Well, that's a good question. Let's see, where's the syllabus? Yeah, if you notice on the syllabus, we didn't quite get to that. Yeah, on the syllabus, just FYI. When you get to the part about classroom rules, yeah, so every assignment has a grace period of 10 hours. So, but of course you'll lose a point for every hour it's late. So every assignment has an extension. So, but just try to get it done as fast as possible without running up into, but the penalty isn't that great. Every assignment is worth 25 points. So turn in a couple hours late, you'll lose 2 points out of the 25, which means if it's an A paper, you can still get an A. Yeah. So every and like it's regardless of any reason. So I just want to be fair. Everybody has a reason, something going on. I understand that, but I can't weigh one person's issues over another. Some people have kids, some people don't, some people have a job. Everybody got something going on that's going to cause them to have problems. But so I just put in that grace period just for that reason. So is that clear?
Thank you.
Okay. So every
Yes.
assignment has a little bit of a grace period. Yeah. So let's see. We're at time. So we'll meet tomorrow. Tomorrow's going to be a little interesting. We'll start off with the discussion about the land use philosophy paper, and then there will be a special presentation, I believe, at 1:30, I think. But I'll tell you all more about that tomorrow. We've been here all day. I'm sure you're ready to go. So if you have any other questions, I'll still be here. You can call me or text me or whatever. If this is your first, let me first let me do this. Stop recording. So this is the end of the 3rd hour on May 4th for urban geography.